It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce Claire Noon. She is an immigration, environmental, and water attorney. She will be leading part 1 and also part 2 of our workshop to really ground us in the understanding of how our government works, why it works the way it does, and our constitutional and individual rights so that we can work towards responding and taking action as appropriately. I do want to say that she is a steward of justice and has spent her life defending those who may or cannot defend themselves. And so with that, I'm really pleased that she's here with us. I think we're very fortunate to have her perspective on what's going on. She is at the nexus of a lot of the challenges that you're seeing in the news and maybe even experiencing yourselves. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Claire for what I am looking forward to as an educational opportunity to remind me as well of our constitutional principles and rights. So with that, let me turn it over to Claire.
Thank you. Do I need both things?
I think you need
I need both?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. I can second, I know that it is a beautiful summertime day and that we all have other things we want to do than go back to understanding government and our role in it and where we can go, where we can take our shared collective existence from here. So I know how difficult this time has been, and I really appreciate you all showing up. This is a great first step. I think that what we've seen in a lot of situations is a separation, a pulling away from the bone and the marrow of what our democratic institution and collective identity has been. And we are finding ourselves alone, isolated, ideologically, emotionally, spiritually, and that is a very dark place in which to imagine a new way. I'm sorry, I'm not feeling so well. It's not contagious, I'm just giving a disclosure. Just a little bit about me. I born and raised in Glenwood Springs. I went to public schools in Glenwood and then went to CRMS for high school. Went to Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington, and then went to law school at the University of Denver. I consider myself a direct beneficiary of our public institutions, specifically education, but I will say that most of my civics and governmental understanding has come in the last 8 years or so as the kind of democratic norms that we have so kind of relied upon to uphold the systems that we have been eroded, and we've had to kind of go back to wait, what is actually our agreed upon system? Growing up in the United States, I think that we all, are beneficiaries of the kind of collective belief that progress moves in one direction. We have been left behind the systems of tyranny and enslavement and institutions where individuals did not have freedom and liberty, and now we are moving only towards greater progress and innovation. And I think we all have been kind of shaken back into humility and clarity, quite frankly, in understanding the last 8 years what has been just kind of an assumption that has not been truly worked through and built upon. Just a little bit more about my direct role in how I am framing everything that I'm doing at this moment. I was raised by an attorney, and my mother was an artist, so creative, but she was an American Studies major from Georgetown University. So my kind of encoding as a child was, number one, we have systems, we have balance of power, we have separate, branches of government, co-equal. There's a divine kind of creative plan, like my mom very much addresses as a creative. America is a creative endeavor, and it is an idea. It is a kind of constraint, like a design that has been made by humans who are inherently flawed. But the design itself is a fun, exciting, meaningful, and worthy creative endeavor. And then I also learned from my dad as an attorney that these systems do not uphold themselves. Governments are not amorphous things that exist outside of us, that we as people, as citizens, as attorneys, as representatives, there are humans who every day do the work of government, and that collective knowledge of that this is a creative endeavor, a creative imagining of how we can, protect and ensure our best public selves, and that it is not done on its own. So that is where I come from. I worked and still work. I started a nonprofit in Bosnia with genocide survivors, women who had survived the Srebrenica genocide. There I learned, I thought that my first mission in life was, to do collective empowerment and economic development with groups that needed support. But my experience in Bosnia kind of very quickly clarified for me that while we all may not feel that we have the access or the direct position to influence government and law, we all feel and exist in the world that is influenced and directed by it. So I went back to law school. I worked at the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, prosecuting the chief general who perpetrated the genocide. That was an amazing experience in international criminal law, international law. We got a conviction of war crimes, crimes against humanity. I saw firsthand how justice is not a ruling of a judge. Justice is a community coming together and every day taking steps to walk closer to each other in a moment when fear and panic is telling us to step away. When we continue to know and to move from our shared values and our deep knowing of justice. And through that, I was able to see after 20 years that justice can be done on a large scale, and it will be done. And through that experience, I have a deep belief that we are made for this moment as Americans. This is not a stepping off of the path of searching, for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is not a detour from America's dream of liberty and justice for all. This is very much our generation's moment to redefine and recommit what America is, what America is as an idea, more than what it is as a system, and who we can be as people when we fully allow ourselves to be moved through that collective experience and walk towards each other when it feels like we want to walk away. Sorry, thank you. So from when I came back at the end of the Obama years after the Bosnia and the Hague, I kind of landed in the United States, becoming and kind of following the track that I had just lived and experienced in former Yugoslavia and through the justice in The Hague. And I very quickly, I think through that kind of shift, I was able to see with the lens of American exceptionalism is not, America is exceptional in its ideals, in the idea that people can come together and create a way that is better for all of us, rather than being subjects or being objects. We are citizens, and that to me is the greatest kind of exceptionalism that America has. So I worked in the first Trump administration. I speak Spanish, and I have a history of immigration law, through law school, and then after the Trump administration began doing family separations and closing down the borders, I kind of volunteered my time. I went to the border about once a month for the 4 years of the Trump administration, wherever it was needed, representing children in asylum cases and detention facilities, working to reunite families, doing asylum applications for families on both sides of the border. I think all told, in the 4 years, I was able to, directly impact like over 1,000 asylum seekers. Those are families, yeah, it's huge. And I say that not because like, oh man, there's nothing special about what it was volunteered. I was able to structure my life in a way that I could take time and go do that intentionally. It was really learning as I went in a lot of ways. Like I'm saying, a lot of our systems that we learned in school don't really have the same foregone kind of reliance that they've had in the past. I really just picked an issue that really mattered to me and zeroed in on what do I know that can help me with this, what don't I know, what do I need to learn, and then where am I needed? And I just did it and continued doing it. And so now that we are back in kind of the mess of kind of urgent, emergent human rights abuses in our names, I'm finding that information and that kind of same practice coming in handy now in 2025. Since the beginning of this Trump administration, I have been working literally around the clock. I do kind of general practice, non-crisis work during the day, and then building of responsiveness, advocacy, and systems building for immigration response at night. And I'm just continuing to step forward with what I can do and where I know I'm needed. I think that we all play a role in this making of the dream that is America. And regardless of national identity, you don't have to be an American to be a citizen. And I mean that like not in the legal sense. There is a legal status that is, under the Immigration and Nationality Act, but to be a true citizen is to be someone who steps forward, who engages, and who acts in the best interest of the social good, and believes in the role of engaged action. And so I'm going to start there. I will just say that I put together a very kind of overly, I would say, academic PowerPoint presentation. And just this morning I was reviewing it and I was thinking, this is out there. People can access, you can Google systems of government, you can Google the branches, separation of powers, all that stuff. That information is there, it has been there. That's not what's missing. What we're missing is where does that information, that knowledge, how does that translate to my life, what I'm doing right now, in a way that actually connects with my life? And I think that in order to kind of communicate that, I'm going to try to use the whiteboard, graphs as necessary, and kind of charts. But kind of structurally speaking, I think that the biggest thing that we can do here today in kind of setting the framework for these 5 sessions is really understanding, kind of running back the clock, just being like, whoa. We've gotten really far in the weeds here. We've gotten really far down all the rabbit holes and lost sight of what we're doing here. In all the senses. And I think that what we can do today is kind of reset the structure of what is government? Why do we have these institutions where we give our money and they, like now it feels like, okay, they can terrorize us, they can, take away our health care, they can fire our, advocates, they can intimidate our, places of worship. Like, what is government? Why are we doing a government to begin with? Is it necessary? Do we, in today's world, is that something that we still agree is necessary? And then, what is the role of government? What are its obligations and duties? And what is a citizen within that system? And I think that it's important to really clarify that before we can even get into the nuance of the big beautiful bill and what immigration is happening right now, what rights of individuals are, what rights of environmental stewardship, all of the trees. We first need to step back and see the forest. and decide if this is the forest that we want or not. And I think that that's one of the greatest liberations that I have experienced in this, this last 8 years has been really the visual and like tangible reminder that this is all made up. All of this. What we have is our bodies, is our spirits, is our souls, and our relationships with each other. And over time, as humans have become, more populated, moved towards agricultural, moving towards kind of economies of labor and sharing of resources, and we've kind of decided as people that this is something that works best for us, we can't all be deciding the rules and arguing the laws and establishing, budgets, things like that. We can't do that, so we are giving the power that is inherently ours. We are assigning it to a representative to do that for us. And then we're assigning, we can't be worried about, I make certain amount of money. I can't be saying, okay, this money I want to go pay that, all right, the school needs a little money. All right, the healthcare needs a little money. I can't be doing that, so we've decided as citizens that paying taxation is a good thing because then it can be, with our representative authority, put to the greatest public use. But that is just how we've gotten here. And that is not where we need to go. I think that when we look back at this era of American history, and it's taught in the history books, the story will not be Donald Trump or what has been done, authoritarian, leaning, backsliding of democracy. Those kind of like bigger things are, to a certain extent, known. There is a playbook that has been, a playbook in the sense, like we have Project 2025, that information's already there, we know what the goal is. But systems where sources of power have been attempted to be consolidated through authoritarian kind of regimes are painfully and boringly predictable. There really isn't going to be a new headline there. The headline is going to be, what did the people do? What did the citizens decide? And what did they do moving forward? That is the headline, that is our history that we are making today. We're not going to be making any history by hoping that the government stops, that our checks and balances work, that our individual representatives kind of hold themselves to the shared values that we hoped they would. That's not going to be the story. The story is going to be, what did we decide to do, and how did we write our story? So I encourage all of you to kind of, when you feel the inevitabilities flowing around and that, oh my gosh, I have no power, this is so outside of me. I'm not a billionaire, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not in DC, I don't have, I can't do anything. This is, all I can do is receive this like mainlining of terrible news and heartbreaking news. That's my role, is just to receive this horrible thing and just surrender and try to eke out some sort of survival. That is not what we're made for. That's not it. What we're made for is to be fully and presently in this moment, let go of what we thought America was, what we hoped it would be, what we thought the election would lead to, what we thought, just really letting go of that and coming back to the power we have to move influence, to move ideas, to move connections, and yet the power that we have within ourselves to frame what we're doing. Because I think that's another really important thing, is the identifying the narrative we tell ourselves about who we are within the system. And I think that is one of the greatest kind of tragedies we're seeing right now, is that the narrative people are telling themselves, and that becomes, prophecy and proverb, is that we are cogs in the wheel. We are but little voices that are not being heard, so what can we do? And that is a powerful narrative, and that is an incredibly difficult thing to overcome. And so I think that our greatest thing we can do before calling our representatives, before researching further the balance of power and the budget and things like that, before any of that, is to sit with ourselves and redefine who we are in this moment as citizens as a verb, not citizens as a noun. We're not here to be acted upon, to be caught up in different swells, to be used as power, manipulated, things like that. No, we are citizens that are believe in the kind of hope of a world where we all can have the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that we can continue to be artists in the truest sense in ourselves and in our making of the world around us, in our democracy, in our institutions, because we are verbs, we are creating, whether or not it feels like it. And so I have there's something that's been, in my immigration work there, the kind of end goal for a lot of people here is to become citizens. And when you are becoming, through the naturalization process, you do a civics test, and you, at the very end, after you pass, you take an oath, a promise. And if you've ever had the privilege to be at a naturalization oath ceremony to experience that kind of beauty, I highly recommend, if you have any friends who are going through this, join them. It is the most moving reaffirmation of kind of the best part of America, the hope of America, and the commitment to the shared work that it takes to make it. But there is an oath that I will share at the very end, an oath of kind of re-swearing. No, it's called sworn again instead of born again, sworn again, Pledge of Allegiance. And it is nonpartisan, doesn't really have anything to do with politics. It's really just that, who am I in this moment? And a very clear moment of that I have a role to play here, and I am clear on my role and my values here. So, with that all being said, we're going to first start with what is government. And a government is, in its essence, an agreement. It's a contract between the people, the citizens, and documents, institutions, kind of values, shared values, and norms. And a government can be democratic, in which the process of reaching consensus is, or the process of making decisions is through a consensus. And so we have a structure of government that is democratic, in that it enables the voices or the representative authority of several, hopefully all the people, but several interest groups and people to be able to listen through options, make decisions, and reach a consensus. It's really important to note, though, democracy is not an end goal. Democracy is is an agreement between people on how to make decisions. That the decisions themselves, democracy does not mandate. Democracy is, how do we get there? Do we have one person, in a government, do we have one person decide that we get there? And some people say that's easier. People are not as informed as they were. People are busy. It's hard. The best and most efficient way to make decisions in the best interest of people is to have one person make them, or a group of people. Sometimes that's been the idea, and some people now think that that's the case. Kind of a paternalistic structure. And that is where our founding fathers came from, is a system of monarchy, wherein one sovereign has subjects that are below and receiving of the power and the influence that they give, with the exchange being, if you do not do this, violence and power will be brought down upon you. I think it's really, every year I read Declaration of Independence as a kind of 4th of July experiment, just to kind of like see how it feels in this day. And I could say I've been doing that. My mom kind of started me with that as a kid, and it's always kind of been a quaint reaffirmation of ideals and like, oh, what a great thing. Or just like thinking like, well, it's a beautiful, like kind of like poetry for me. It kind of, it has a resonance of an ideal. Reading it this year was very different. It is almost, it would be humorous if it wasn't so tragic. The conditions that the founding fathers were under, they were being taxed without representation. They were giving money to a government that was not listening or acting in their best interest. They were being, laws were being placed upon them that they did not agree with, that did not align with their values or where they lived. And they had no recourse, they had no redress. And they decided to pledge their fortunes, lives, and liberties on this declaration that is incredibly powerful. I'm going to read the first preamble to it. And then I will also read the conditions, just a couple conditions for which they list a tyrant. They list the crimes of a tyrant in the Declaration of Independence, which forever has been, like, oh, interesting. That's like a historical document that's interesting. Reading the crimes of a tyrant laid out so clearly as justification for entirely rewriting government is so applicable to today, regardless of political affiliation, policy, that I think that this document now, more so than ever, is a instruction manual for how to find the resolve and the clarity of mind to establish what we believe. So I'm just going to read the beginning, and I think, I know you've heard these words, but try just to kind of sit with where we are today. The Declaration of Independence. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare in the cause which impel them to the separation. So essentially this is, at sometimes you realize we can no longer go on associating and being bound the way we are. We need to reconnect with our life, our God-given or our source-given, reconnect to our natural state, and reconnect to what we know. And so this is them now saying, now we're going to tell you what we believe. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate governments long established, that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evidences a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. So that, to me, hits us a nail on a head, that when, as people, we see patterns of the way that our government is treating us, receiving us, interacting with us. When we see that, it is our duty, it is our right to say no more and to change it, to come up and imagine a new way that is best suited to us to protect our God-given, source-given, natural-given rights and safeguard our futures. The Constitution that followed after the Declaration of Independence is a contract, is a legal contract, but it is not in which it is not kind of I think we've lost sight of what it actually is. The Constitution is a protection against government for the people. It is a full acknowledgement that if left to their own devices, power will consolidate, power will corrupt, power will not be in the best interest of the people. Human history has shown it for millennia that it is impossible without clear safeguards, like held and defended against, for just kind of the good nature of all to be considered. The Constitution was thoughtfully placed. I mean, there's lots. The Constitution is not a perfect document, and nor is the system of American government. They are of their time. They are an attempt to move towards that more perfect union, but they are of white men, consolidating power among white men, identifying who is and who is not welcome to the bounty of the system as they are creating it. But at its core, the knowledge is government in and of itself will not save us. Government in and of itself, if left to its own devices without rigorous control, will become a harm to us. And that's why the Constitution of the United States defends and clarifies the rights, doesn't give rights. I think that that's a really problematic thing. We aren't given rights by the Constitution. Those rights are already ours. That's what we hold these truths to be self-evident. Those are our rights. We just have these rules in the Constitution that say, if they come for that right this way, I can do this. If they come for that right this way, I can do this. They can't do that. Like, it's a very clear defense mechanism. It is not a source. And I think changing that mind that the source is the intangible knowledge of our inherent and collective value that we need to defend against government. So I think I'm going to show really quickly when the United States was conceptualized. It was within a context of that could not imagine it, and I think that that's a really powerful kind of inspiration. Again, I think the founding fathers, it's been well documented their limitations and all of the people who were left out of their vision. Without a doubt, there's so much to be there that's problematic. What they did accomplish was to imagine a new way where there was none that had been seen, none that could be imagined. And they came together, created community, and pledged their oath to each other instead of to a sovereign. And I think if they can imagine that, we can imagine more. So so just really as like a very clear understanding of the US, the system of government. It started, so this was like in the UK, there was one sovereign, and they, the king, the monarch, and then we also have like the authoritarian, any kind of form of consolidated power. And that was inflicted upon subjects. That was the flow of power. And power, a definition I like about power is the ability and to ensure that your will is done. So there's power of violence, there's power of subjugation, of manipulation, of appeal, of community, of nurturing. Like there's a lot of different forms of power. And I think that we only think of power as physical violence or coercion, which that is entirely a form of power that obviously has worked throughout human history. But I think further developing our understanding of power, and we'll do that more next week with the actual individual rights and the individual powers. So this was what had always been. This is what people knew. The sovereign gives, has grace, has mercy, oh, and we can live. The United States came, or the founding fathers, due in large part to taxes, kind of decided that that was it, the straw that broke the camel's back, whether by geographic distance from the sovereign or kind of too many, the kind of relationship and understanding of the benefits were too far gone. And again, that happened in other places, so I don't think that's a fair kind of understanding of the imagination that it took to create the system. But it is...
But it's hard for people to see that in the
Oh.
background. Can you make that darker or bigger?
Yes, I can. Well, I'll do our better one, darker and bigger. We'll do the replacement system. Okay.
You want to set that on the table?
Yeah.
The whole.
Let me draw it and then I'll hold it up. So we took the sovereign and we made government. But knowing that when power is consolidated, it corrupts, we split that government into 3 co-equal branches. We said we still want the role, the sovereign protects us from outside violence. It, creates like a system of an economy. It creates, like all of these different things. If, there's law and order, if someone, does something wrong against people, we have someone who can take care of it. In my work right now, I'm trying to kind of replace infrastructure for, when you need something, and the police have now kind of been more of a adversarial force, especially for people, black and brown, various immigration statuses. So how do we kind of create that very real need to call someone when you're in trouble, but not wanting to make more trouble? So that's kind of an experiment I'm doing with rapid response networks. But anyway, knowing that there is benefit to having someone else outside of us, or some pressure, some existence, to help kind of regulate and provide guardrails for our system. And so, but those cannot be left to one person, one party, one group. And so these 3 co-equal branches were created. And they are, as I'm sure you all remember, legislative, executive, and judicial. Judicia. So they, this is now what, we took one sovereign and cut it into, they say, what's the dog that guards Hades? 3-headed dog? Cerberus. That is what we have now. That is our government. It is not in and of itself a promise of human rights and empowerment. It is not health and wellness. It is literally just taking the one sovereign we had and chopping it up into 3 and saying, okay, you go over there, you make the laws. Legislative, that's Congress. The House of Representatives, and the Senate. You go, we'll elect you, you will take our power, and you will make laws between you. You will make policy based upon the shared values of our society, of our elected group. So when we send elected representatives to the legislature, we hope that they bring our vision of living in Western Colorado, what matters to us, our shared values, to make policy, to make law in the legislature. The executive, unfortunately, they weren't going to do an executive branch. But while they were doing the kind of structure, George Washington was there, and he was leading the kind of workshopping of a system of government, and he was being so diplomatic and
patient and kind that the founding fathers were like, man, it would be really great if we had someone like him also as part of the government. So they had him in mind and built this role after his image. So it's like if George Washington, I mean, there's a lot of legacy that we can benefit from, but the role of the executive in, like a sole executive, a chief executive of the government, was created kind of as an afterthought because they saw how great George Washington was. Importantly, he also was the one when they said, yeah, you can just, their nature kind of took over and they're like, you can just always be in that role. And he's like, no, that's against what we're doing here. I'll take the role, begrudgingly, but it's going to have limits, it's going to have restrictions. So in a way, he did ultimately help us. And the executive makes sure that the laws are carried out, has ways of, administering, workforce to kind of do the policy work, has ways to make sure, through inaction of war, but again, the war powers are split. But the executive, is the one who makes sure that the laws are carried out. And then the judicial is the one that makes sure that the laws are legal. That if they are the ones that ultimately decide whether or not it is constitutional to have those laws. And the way that we get there is through litigation, through the people ultimately bringing the action. So these three heads of the sovereign have been the source and the form of our federal government. In the Constitution, very clearly, and it's important to know that any power that is not explicitly and clearly given is retained by the citizen. So they can't create new power, create new law that is not in and of itself either under the Constitution or by popular mandate through a vote. And so with executive orders, I know that there's a feeling, the kind of perception that the executive is overstepping that role, like they're just making rules, making laws, overstepping things that have not existed. It's important to note the executive orders, yes, they go around the entire process of, a bill becoming, sent over to both branches and then vetoed or signed and then litigated. But the executive order is an instrument that is very limited. It's still, the executive cannot do anything, cannot write an executive order that is not sourced, or it does not have any effect if it is not sourced in the Constitution. So when we're seeing all these executive orders that are essentially just wishes and memoranda of instructions to the staff of the executive branch. That's it. So like when we're talking about, which by the way, the executive branch, I think up until this year, was the largest employer in the world for a long, all of the branches of government, all of the offices and administrations under the executive are huge. I mean, we have Homeland Security, we have environmental protection, we have so many different interests, Department of Justice, all of these different federal workers were under the executive umbrella. So an executive order instructing them to do something or not do something is within the authority of the executive. That does not mean, though, that a law cannot be brought against that or that it cannot be ruled unconstitutional, but that what we're seeing, while it is a very scary erosion of our trust that these systems work, in all reality, the systems themselves have not changed that much. The perception of them has. And I think our awakening to it, their flaws and the inability to continue on with business as usual is what has changed. There has always been a kind of balance of powers that every branch can check the other through vetoes, through appointments, and different mechanisms. those have always existed, and there always have been workarounds, agreements, interest groups. There have always been errors. What we're seeing right now, though, is the public, the incredibly emotional and harmful violation of the trust of the people, more so than the government itself breaking down. We still have a democracy in some senses, based on a lot of national or international kind of watchdog groups. We are in what's called a acute backslide in democracy, and are trending. Some have decided to remove the democratic label. But our system of government, as it was designed and as it is still in place, is democratic, in that one person cannot make and execute, enforce, and judge the laws or the acts of the people. What we are seeing now is that the effort to conceal, I would say, the effort to conceal this kind of what actually happens has been dropped away, and we are seeing now really what has been happening for the last 20 years, really. Since 9/11, we started to see the kind of public, the paternalism of the public really shift, that it is in everyone's best interest to not have rights. It is in everyone's best interest to not have privacy. It is in everyone's best interest to not have the funds they pay in their taxes used for their communities, but to be sent abroad. Those kind of really clear shifts of what is in the best interest of the people, we saw starting after 9/11 really clearly. But I will say that remaining these three co-equal branches of government, they, as designed, are intended to be co-equal. And if anyone is more powerful, it is the legislature, because it has more checks on each branch. The executive itself, the office of the executive, has a physical face, as we're seeing in a president, but that is I think that does not do us justice to understand. As we saw the first administration, as soon as a new president was elected, we all let off the gas. We said, great, we're back to everything going back to normal. We're back to democratic, norms and institutions. We're back to, I can go back to my life. And then we see what happens when the kind of figurehead of a movement of power goes away. The people very quickly can lose sight of what the threat is. And I think that we can't let that happen again. I don't think we'll be allowed to, quite frankly. The rate with which the Project 2025 is being carried out, the erasure and erosion of the integrity of the balances. So again, these systems, the Constitution itself, just words. It has nothing self-actualizing. It is just kind of like a recipe. And we and humans on every level of government are the ones who actually do the work. So what we're seeing is another big shift in our kind of democratic reality was Citizens United, where, even before that, when corporations are given personhood. Like, fundamentally speaking, our government has ceased, we permitted and have allowed to continue that the interests of government to protect life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for people, for persons, includes corporate personhood, legally speaking. So it is entirely legal and according to our mandate to protect those interests of shareholders and corporations. Like, that is not against our government. We have made that, through our branches of government, we have made corporate interest the same as person interest. And that is, I think, one of the huge things that maybe could not have been foreseen, but also it wasn't their job to foresee, quite frankly. We put a lot on the founding fathers to have envisioned all of these potential crises just 250 years ago. It's our turn now to say, okay, we've seen what happened. We got the blueprint, the recipe. We've tried a couple batches of this recipe. We think we're going to tweak it. We're going to tweak it, or we're going to make something new. And
And to try to go back and say, oh, but the founders meant this, the founders meant that, I think hands over our power and our ability to choose our own form of government. Again, democracy, just really quickly, is not an end. It is a means. It is a framework for reaching a decision. That's it. And there's nothing inherently good about that. There's nothing inherently bad about that. Just like authoritarian, by definition, having a sovereign, there's nothing good inherently. You could have, as we've seen, society have existed under benevolent sovereigns in which people were happy and had everything provided and no need to change. So that's a possibility. It's just a mechanism and a framework for making decisions. And if the people that we, how we elect and who we elect are not able to, because of the pressures of corporate interest, because of the now pressures of political or physical violence, are not able to, make those choices and make those acts on our behalf, then it is not being done. And so that's the ultimate kind of decision of whether or not we are a democracy or not. And so I think I would encourage everyone again to, when we see those things like US taken off of Democratic list, US, that is, I think, ego. Our egos are really hurt by that because we have better hopes for who we are. It doesn't really change in practice. It just clarifies what we need to do. One thing, just kind of thinking about the perception and how it shifts of, based on the framing that we give it, the narrative, with immigration specifically. Since 9/11, we've had a kind of law enforcement body for immigration known as Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, under DHS, and we'll talk about this more next week. But they have had the rights to identify, investigate, and deport individuals who are not natural-born citizens, pretty liberally. There has just been social norms and democratic norms that have restricted that, and individual temperaments that have impacted the instructions that are given to them. And we're just seeing someone with a little less restraint and a little more, violence towards them, making the instructions. But the laws have not changed. The authority has not changed. And I was, at the beginning of this administration, I did a big push to keep out a immigration detention facility in Western Colorado. And as part of that, I was really looking into bearing down on the impacts of having those facilities nearby, what it does to communities, what it does to how many people are rounded up. And looking at the numbers from Bush to Obama to Trump to Biden, back to Trump, they are not that different. And I think that really is hard to hear because I worked on Obama's campaign. I was a part of I managed the Green Team for his Democratic National Convention. I'm a true believer in the principles of hope and equality that he brought. But in practice, it doesn't matter how you frame it. There still was this through line through all different political parties, through all different eras of a law enforcement body separating communities and families that has really been unchecked and unchallenged up until now because it has overstepped that bound. And the people are saying, wait, this was not our agreement to do this. And so this is kind of the challenge. The source of their power comes from the governed. We are the governed. And we get to decide, do we give the source for them to send unmasked or masked, unmarked vigilantes into schools to rip children away? Is that authority that we give the government? And we can either, by not saying no, say yes. But there really is nothing fundamentally different as we have been shifting. It's just, again, the falling away of the facade, which I think is ultimately a blessing. You speak with any marginalized community over the last 250 years, 300 years since colonialization was brought to these shores, and you will see that there's nothing new under the sun as far as ways in which government can subjugate and harm people. And I think that now we are seeing and being drawn into more and more people are being impacted. Their conscience is being impacted. And that, I think, is what's ultimately the blessing that we will see out of this moment in time. So back to citizens and what a citizen is. To citizen is a verb. It is something that is done. It is engaging in relationship on every level. These structures of government come down all the way. We have federal legislature, federal executive, and federal judiciary. We have a state legislative, executive, and judiciary. And that system is kind of throughout. We have our municipal governments have, the kind of like municipal courts, the mayor, the council or the trustees, same kind of division of that three-headed sovereign. So this system is deeply entrenched in how we engage and how we show up. There's a wonderful author, her name's Tricia Hersey. She kind of came about, she was a historian and I think a reverend in a Baptist church. And she's a black woman, and she was doing kind of the understanding, kind of the historical lens of kind of moving out of, like thinking of enslavement and then out of enslavement, and kind of really came down to the idea that rest is the key. And this is just a side note, that without deep rest in all the senses, and that is what we don't have when we're looking at phones and the soul is being met with genocide and violence. It is kind of mental, where we're working more than we ever have and getting less than we ever had, and kind of spiritual kind of regeneration of nature, things like that. That kind of rest is what gives you dream space and enables you to have the kind of critical and hopeful imagination to imagine new ways. And there's something that's been happening with our society as it's kind of become more individualized and kind of clearer in that way. Less citizen, more consumer. That the way that we think of government is less about a relational dynamic and more about what is given in exchange for, like it's a transaction rather than a covenant. And so her kind of thesis is that in order to imagine and like, to re-engage in that covenant and to create a new one, we need to rest, deeply rest, pull out of systems, pull out of ways of being, pull out of grind, and settle. And it will take time for the mind to kind of be able to recalibrate in the body and the soul. And then we begin to have dreams of different ways. Because what's happening right now, we're not going to be able to undo. We're not going to be able to undo the kind of awakening that's happening. We can always undo systems. They're people made. They can be people remade. But the harm to families, what we're seeing is something that we can't undo. So what we need to do is mitigate harm, stop what's being harmed, but also we need to put a lot of work into imagining new ways. And that is where citizenship, that is where citizen-ing as a verb comes in. And that is our main role. I'm going to send out later this afternoon, I have a kind of chart of all of the elected officials we have from our local all the way up to our federal representatives, how to contact them, very simple. That's kind of been what's focused on as far as citizenship though, and citizening as a verb. It's looking at that one authority we had, that one power, we delegated to representatives, and then the only thing we can do is pester them to do that. That's citizening in 2025. And they either listen or they don't, and that's it. And that is incredibly important. And I can't say how, it is very important. When you make calls, when you write letters, those get made into record. They are humans. The more noise they hear about something, the more greasy wheel or squeaky wheel gets the grease. If enough people are saying enough things, they just want to, go about their lives. Most representatives, okay, we'll do it, whatever. That's kind of the energy, and that's they're people. So it matters, and it matters. But to restrict and define that as the only thing we can be doing right now is a disservice to ourselves and a disservice to the kind of divine right that we all have to self-governance in its truest form. So self-governance of the mind and of the spirit, self-governance of family, how we want to construct and hold our families, and self-governance of communities, self-governance of state and of nationhood. That a representative delegation of power is really a limited scope for what it is to be a citizen. And next week we'll talk more about the ways in which the people who are at the kind of front lines of these threats, like the individuals who, immigrants is kind of the main scope, but also, healthcare. We're going to see all of the different ways in which this system is no longer serving the public good and what we can do about it. But the very, essential thing that needs to be reimagined is, what do we want in our collective and civic lives? And remembering, I think, the most important, so this is like the co-equal branches of government, but the number one role and the number one, so the source of the power and the most important engine for change is an equal branch, essentially. And that the citizen's role in every part of branch of government is what defines and makes a government democratic, enlightened, authoritarian, tyrannical. The role of the citizen is the core. And so I think reclaiming citizenship, reclaiming patriotic citizenship, not as a way of inflicting your will on others or your beliefs or your prejudice, judgment on others, but as truly a way to build and create networks. Eric Liu is a really wonderful, he has a citizenship academy that is really, I'll share a link to that. But he says, rather than thinking of government as a machine that you put fuel in by voting, and then your cog, your cog kind of goes out to other cogs that do their job, and these checks and balances, like machine outputs rights or outputs healthcare, outputs education for the well-being, outputs protection from foreign invasion. That's a machine. That's not what democracy is. That's not what true citizen-led systems are. He says to look at it more like a garden that is chaotic, that is wild, and requires deep and devotional tending, nurturing. The seed of our system is the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the ideals of life, liberty, pursuit, and happiness. But that seed on its own will not grow, will not flourish. Sometimes, it grows and it overshadows another part of, the garden, and it requires quiet, devotional belief that the garden will grow and produce fruit and food, and collective sharing of labor in that action. We have, in a lot of senses, outsourced that labor of maintenance and nurturing of government and systems to representatives, to an executive, which makes this moment even more significant, that because we've handed so much over to the face of the executive, when the face of the executive turns against us, we're seeing we don't really have a lot left. Our social networks are frayed. Our mental resilience, our kind of clarity of thought and what we're doing here is frayed. Our relationships with local government and understanding of what it does is frayed. And we're seeing now that we cannot outsource this. This is not a machine that has a programmable result. And that's why the goal is to create a more perfect union. It's not to create a perfect union, because that would be inhuman, and that would be to ignore the kind of chaos that is humanity and take away the beauty of it. And so I think thinking of the ways in which we can all tend the garden is going to be our kind of blueprint for being a citizen. And I think Another, we think of protest, which we'll talk more about protest next week, but protest and voting are really protest, voting, and nagging of representatives is what we see. And if you're someone who, for a litany of reasons can't physically go and protest, can't, read up on all the budget lines and call and do all that, doesn't know what's going on, just trying to make ends meet and survive, it's really easy to kind of start to see a way that you don't fit in the system, that it's not for you, and you're a cog, you're a byproduct of the powerful. And that it's remembering the kind of sinew, the infrastructure of community that underpins all of the governmental structure that we have, that is where we are going to not only survive and through this, because most of us will survive this. I think that's another important thing to remember. We are all kind of in this mindset that this is it. There is no, not all of us, but a lot of us are just thinking there's no way out. This is it. This is just the end for climate reasons, for social reasons, for economic reasons. There's no way we can get through this. The majority of us will make it through this. And it's what we do after that matters. And so one of the kind of, I'm going to send you forward with a few things today. One being kind of a self-reflective idea. And that being, how am I a tender of the garden of the democratic system? Where am I a citizen? Do you volunteer at schools? Do you parent? Do you vote? Do you really write it down? What do I do that impacts the way that my world functions? And that isn't just with the federal government or state government or local government. That is, how do I engage with do I look people in the eye? Do I hold the door open? Do I, respond to texts when people are saying, hey, have you guys heard about this thing? What should we do? Do I take a friend's kid when she has to go to a doctor's appointment? Do I, little things like that don't feel like citizenship, don't feel like the formations of a democratic, the most powerful nation in history of the world. But that is ultimately what it was built upon and what it was meant to sustain and continue, was the ability of the people, the freedom of the people to exist in our natural state of kindness, community, good. Most people are good, and that was the kind of idea, is that governments are bad. Governments are the institutions in which power is consolidated and ultimately just inevitably wielded against people. So we need a way to protect people from that force so that they can go about doing the good that is inherent to all of us. And so next week I'll ask what people have thought of the ways that they already are doing it. And then maybe we'll kind of think of new ways to strengthen and kind of reaffirm the work that is democracy. Because I think that I remember the picture, one of the reasons I loved Obama as an idea, as an idea, was the picture of him kind of leaning back the last week of the first political campaign. He hadn't been elected yet. And his feet were up on his desk, and the picture was of his feet looking back, and his shoes were so worn. They were about to break through holes. But he was polished on the top, but you could tell he had been working, walking, and doing the work of, and I think that was for me something that I was it looks very easy, and power is this thing that is, wielded. But seeing that, the actual physical representation of the work that it takes to make this all work, I hold very closely, and I have for myself, and I can share it, but I also don't want to dictate. I have for myself kind of low bandwidth acts that I know continue to do that work for me and in my world. I have medium bandwidth and then high bandwidth. Obviously, when I'm feeling I have a lot to give, I'm going to, for instance, I testified in the whistleblower case against Governor Polis. he had directed, against Colorado law that he had signed, he directed the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment to turn over records, private, personally identifying information on individuals associated with unaccompanied minors without a subpoena, without a warrant, without an associated criminal, like nothing. He directed them to turn over records, and a whistleblower stated, you're directing me to break law. So there was a case, and I had seen in Newcastle, we had Health and or HSI, which is the Homeland Security Investigations, come to a trailer park and go door to door, just asking to check in on people, check if kids were okay, using the kind of governmental purpose of protection and welfare as a targeted, looking for people to identify for deportation. And the harm that caused, not only in that small trailer park, but in the ability of the community to trust that if welfare comes, to actually check on a kid from the county with actual purpose that we want them to do, people aren't going to trust them. People aren't going to call 911. People aren't going to report violence, domestic violence. People aren't going to testify in cases. The whole system of trust breaks down. And so knowing all of that, I made the decision to testify, and we ended up getting an injunction, so he is barred for now from sharing that information. But things like that are a lot bigger lifts. It was a 4-day trial or hearing. That's a much bigger citizen act that I don't have power, I don't have the bandwidth for all the time. And going back to the rest, remembering I am a human being, I am of this earth and for this earth. I am meant to live and enjoy the world that is potentially fleeting, or is fleeting, potentially rapidly so. And so remembering that balance. And so just starting to, that's why I'm not going to share with you mine right now. I'm not going to share with you my kind of directives. I kind of want the mandate for, or an invitation for the next week to be to really lean that rest. Give yourself rest, and not as a step away from citizen action, not a step away from activism or giving up, but as a commitment to doing it better, a commitment to giving the silence to your body and your spirit to allow you to tell you what role you play here. Because we've all forgotten that. We've all quieted that out and listened to others say, we got to show up in protest, we got to call your representatives, here's the number, here's what you say, go. It's important to have that kind of stuff, but we need to know what we say. What do we feel? What do we think about this? What is really happening for us as individuals in this moment? And how does it feel? And then from there, we can move into, how do I want it to feel? How do I want to be free to show up for my family, for my community, for my neighbors? How do I want this to work? And then from there, we can imagine, how could a system, a government, protect us? Or how could a system protect and enable, kind of give a cove that I could exist and do that in? And that only will come from the individual kind of spark. And so when we go forward, really remembering that this is not above and beyond our skill set. Each and every one of us has a role to play right here. This is not outside. We're not too tired, too poor, too debt-laden. We're not too busy. We're not too demanded upon to do this. And that actually the moment right now, the story that will be told is how we did it despite. They'll look back, they'll say, man, look at how people used to live. They worked harder than ever. They were more isolated than ever. They were more sick than ever. They died alone, and like just looking at the state of the world in which we live. And despite those real acts and experiences that they were having, they found the way to come together, to step towards instead of step away, and to make a system that now we benefit from, like imagining the grandchildren speaking. So I'm going to read a little thing right now about, first a poem from Langston Hughes about Let America Be America. That is, I think, beautiful. And then I'm going to read the pledge of the sworn again Pledge of Allegiance, But I encourage, I'll send out a little more resourcing, but I really encourage you to kind of step away from information seeking right now. Step away from the violence that we are being shown through our phones, through our ears every day, and step back into yourself and in your body and in this space, and ground yourself here, and ground yourself in your garden, and imagine being a gardener of democracy, of community, and start from there. I think that that's where we all need to start, because just like my mom taught me very young, is that this is a creative endeavor. Nothing is set in stone. This is paper. This is the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, tiny little things, ideas. But what makes them powerful is our trust and faith in them, our contribution to them, or contribution, delegation of contribution. But what the role that the citizens play in making this. And in remembering that this whole thing doesn't work without us. Like, they need us. And I just caught myself. There is no they. There is no they. It's we. Like, we the people through and through. Like, we might be like these are just like weasels in a trench coat, essentially. The they is, yeah. So we are the weasels. Like, we get to kind of take the trench coat off and be like, okay, wait, let's figure this out again. And so, like, as you, just imagining a way requires a reconnecting to ourselves. And that nothing is set, nothing is predetermined. And anyone who tells you that it is has an interest. Anyone who tells you that this is how it is, it's going to be only like this, or if you don't this, then this, and you might as well blank. That's an interest, that is a motivation, that is an attempt at power against you, on you. And that is not truth. And so remembering what small groups of people can do with that clarity of self, clarity of mind, and clarity of purpose, we can create systems that we all can trust and believe in.